हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल। तो आज की वीडियो में हम देखने वाले हैं एनसीईआरटी पॉलिटी क्लास 9, जिसमें आज हम देखेंगे चैप्टर 2 जो कि है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डिज़ाइन। तो शुरू करते हैं हमारा आज का चैप्टर। We noted in the previous chapter that in a democracy, the rulers are not free to do what they like. There are certain basic rules that the citizen and the government have to follow. All such rules together are called constitution. As the supreme law of the country, the constitution determines the rights of citizens, the powers of the government, and how the government should function. In this chapter, we ask some basic questions about the constitutional design of a democracy. Why do we need a constitution? How are the constitutions drawn up? Who designs them and in what way? What are the values that shape the constitutions in democratic states? Once a constitution is accepted, can we make changes later as required by the changing conditions? One recent instance of designing constitution for a democratic state is that of South Africa. We begin this chapter by looking at what happened there and how the South Africans went about this task of designing their constitution. Then we turn to how the Indian constitution was made, what its foundation values are, and how it provides a good framework for the conduct of citizens' life and that of the government. Democratic Constitution in South Africa. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. This was Nelson Mandela being tried for treason by the white South African government. He and 7 other leaders were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964 for daring to oppose the apartheid regime in his country. He spent the next 28 years in South Africa's most dreaded prison, Robben Island. Struggle against apartheid. Apartheid was the name of a system of racial discrimination unique to South Africa. The white Europeans imposed this system on South Africa. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the trading companies from Europe occupied it with arms and force, in the way they occupied India. But unlike India, a large number of whites had settled in South Africa and became the local rulers. The system of apartheid divided the people and labeled them on the basis of their skin color. The native people of South Africa are black in color. They made up about 3/4 of the population and were called blacks. Beside these two groups, there were people of mixed races who were called colored and people who migrated from India. The white rulers treated all non-whites as inferiors. The non-whites did not have voting rights. The apartheid system was particularly oppressive for the blacks. They were forbidden from living in white areas. They could work in white areas only if they had a permit. Trains, buses, taxis, hotels, hospitals, schools and colleges, libraries, cinema halls, theaters, beaches, swimming pools, public toilets were all separate for the whites and blacks. This was called segregation. They could not even visit the churches where the whites worshipped. Blacks could not form associations or protest against the terrible treatment. Since 1950, the blacks, colored, and Indians fought against the apartheid system. They launched protest marches and strikes. The African National Congress was the umbrella organization that led the struggle against the policies of segregation. This included many workers' unions and the Communist Party. Many sensitive whites also joined the ANC to oppose apartheid and played a leading role in this struggle. Several countries denounced apartheid as unjust and racist. but the white racist government continued to rule by detaining, torturing, and killing thousands of black and colored people. Towards a new constitution. As protest struggles against apartheid had increased, the government realized that they could no longer keep the blacks under their rule through repression. The white regime changed its policies. Discriminatory laws were repealed. Ban on political parties and restrictions on the media were lifted. After 28 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela walked out of the jail as a free man. Finally, at the midnight of 26 April 1994, the new national flag of the Republic of South Africa was unfurled, making the newly born democracy in the world. The apartheid government came to an end, paving way for the formation of a multiracial government. How did this come about? Let us hear Mandela, the first president of this new South Africa, on this extraordinary transition. Historical enemies succeeded in negotiating a peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy, exactly because we were prepared to accept the inherent capacity for goodness in the other. My wish is that South Africans never give up on the belief in goodness, that they cherish that faith in human beings is the cornerstone of our democracy. After the emergence of the new democratic South Africa, black leaders appealed to fellow blacks to forgive the whites for the atrocities they had committed while in power. They said, "Let us build a new South Africa based on equality of all races and men and women, on democratic values, social justice, and human rights." The party that ruled through oppression and brutal killings, and the party that led the freedom struggle, sat together to draw up a common constitution. After 2 years of discussion and debate, they came out with one of the finest constitutions in the world has ever had. This constitution gave to its citizens the most extensive rights available in any country. Together, they decided that in the search for a solution to the problems, nobody should be excluded, no one should be treated as a demon. They agreed that everybody should become part of the solution, whatever they might have done or represented in the past. The preamble to the South African Constitution sums up this spirit. The South African Constitution inspires democrats all over the world, a state denounced by the entire world till 1994 as the most undemocratic one is now seen as a model of democracy. What made this change possible was the determination of the people of South Africa to work together to transform bitter experiences into the binding glue of a rainbow nation. Speaking on the South African Constitution, Mandela said, "The Constitution of South Africa speaks of both the past and the future. On the one hand, it is a solemn pact in which we as South Africans declare to one another that we shall never permit a repetition of our racist, brutal, and repressive past. But it is more than that. It is also a charter for the transformation of our country into one which is truly shared by all its people, a country which in the fullest sense belongs to all of us, black and white, women and men." Why do we need a constitution? The South African example is a good way to understand why we need a constitution and what do constitutions do. The oppressor and the oppressed in this new democracy were planning to live together as equals. It was not going to be easy for them to trust each other. They had their fears. They wanted to safeguard their interest. The black majority was keen to ensure that the democratic principle of majority rule was not compromised. They wanted substantial social and economic rights. The white minority was keen to protect its privileges and property. After long negotiations, both parties agreed to compromise. The whites agreed to the principle of majority rule and that of one person, one vote. They also agreed to accept some basic rights for the poor and the workers. The blacks agreed that majority rule would not be absolute. They agreed that the majority would not take away the property of the white minority. This compromise was not easy. How was this compromise going to be implemented? Even if they managed to trust each other, what was the guarantee that this trust will not be broken in future? The only way to build and maintain trust in such a situation is to write down some rules of the game that everyone would abide by. These rules lay down how the rulers are to be chosen in future. These rules also determine what the elected governments are empowered to do and what they cannot do. Finally, these rules decide the rights of the citizen. These rules will work only if the winner cannot change them very easily. This is what the South Africans did. They agreed on some basic rules. They also agreed that these rules will be supreme, that no government will be able to ignore this. This set of basic rules is called a constitution. Constitution making is not unique to South Africa. Every country has diverse groups of peoples. Their relationship may not have been as bad as that between the whites and the blacks in South Africa. But all over the world, people have differences of opinion and interest. Whether democratic or not, most countries in the world need to have these basic rules. This applies not just to governments. Any association needs to have its constitution. It could be a club in your area, a cooperative society, or a political party. They all need a constitution. Thus, the constitution of a country is a set of written rules that are accepted by all people living together in a country. Constitution is the supreme law that determines the relationship among people living in a territory called citizens, and also the relationship between the people and government. A constitution does many things. First, it generates a degree of trust and coordination that is necessary for different kind of people to live together. Second, it specifies how the government will be constituted, who will have power to take which decision. Third, it lays down limits on the powers of the government and tells us what the rights of the citizens are. And fourth, it expresses the aspirations of the people about creating a good society. All countries that have constitutions are not necessarily democratic, but all countries that are democratic will have constitutions. After the War of Independence against Great Britain, the Americans gave themselves a constitution. After the Revolution, the French people approved a democratic constitution. Since then, it has become a practice in all democracies to have a written constitution. Making of the Indian Constitution. Like South Africa, India's constitution was also drawn up under very difficult circumstances. The making of the constitution for a huge and diverse country like India was not an easy affair. At the time, the people of India were emerging from the status of subjects to that of citizens. The country was born through a partition on the basis of religious differences. This was a traumatic experience for the people of India and Pakistan. At least 10 lakh people were killed on both sides of the border in partisan related violence. There was another problem. The British had left it to the rulers of the princely states to decide whether they wanted to merge with India or with Pakistan, or remain independent. The merger of these princely states was a difficult and uncertain task. When the constitution was being written, the future of the country did not look as secure as it does today. The makers of the constitution had anxieties about the present and the future of the country. The path to constitution. Despite all these difficulties, there was one big advantage for the makers of the Indian constitution. Unlike South Africa, they did not have to create a consensus about what a democratic India should look like. Much of this consensus had evolved during the freedom struggle. Our national movement was not merely a struggle against a foreign rule. It was also a struggle to rejuvenate our country and to transform our society and politics. There were sharp differences of opinion within the freedom struggle about the path India should take after independence. Such differences exist even today, yet some basic ideas had come to be accepted by almost everyone. As far back as in 1928, Motilal Nehru and 8 other Congress leaders drafted a constitution for India. In 1931, the resolution at the Karachi session of the Indian National Congress dwelt on how independent India's constitution should look like. Both these documents were committed to the inclusion of universal adult franchise, right to freedom and equality, and to protecting the rights of minorities in the Constitution of Independent India. Thus, some basic values were accepted by all leaders much before the Constituent Assembly met to deliberate on the Constitution. The familiarity with political institutions of colonial rule also helped develop an agreement over the institutional design. The British rule had given voting rights only to a few. On that basis, the British had introduced very weak legislatures. Elections were held in 1937 to provincial legislatures and ministers all over British India. These were not fully democratic governments, but the experience gained by Indians in the working of the legislative institutions proved to be very useful for the country in setting up its own institutions and working in them. That is why the Indian Constitution adopted many institutional details and procedures from colonial laws like the Government of India Act 1935. Years of thinking and deliberation on the framework of the Constitution had another benefit. Our leaders gained confidence to learn from other countries, but on our own terms. Many of our leaders were inspired by the ideals of French Revolution, the practice of parliamentary democracy in Britain, and the Bill of Rights in the US. The Socialist Revolution in Russia had inspired many Indians to think of shaping a system based on social and economic equality. Yet they were not simply imitating what others had done. At each step, they were questioning whether these things suited our country. All these factors contributed to the making of our Constitution. The Constituent Assembly, who then were the makers of the Indian Constitution. You will find here a very brief sketch of some of the leaders who played an important role in making the Constitution. The drafting of the document called the Constitution was done by an assembly of elected representatives called the Constituent Assembly. Elections to the Constituent Assembly were held in July 1946. Its first meeting was held in December 1946. Soon after the country was divided into India and Pakistan, the Constituent Assembly was also divided into the Constituent Assembly of India and that of Pakistan. The Constituent Assembly that wrote the Indian Constitution had 299 members. The Assembly adopted the Constitution on 26 November 1949, but it came into effect on 26 January 1950. To mark this day, we celebrate January 26 as Republic Day every year. Why should we accept the Constitution made by this Assembly more than 6 decades ago? We have already noted one reason above. The Constitution does not reflect the views of its members alone. It expresses a broad consensus of its time. Many countries of the world have had to rewrite their constitution afresh because the basic rules were not acceptable to all major social groups or political parties. In some other countries, the constitution exists as merely piece of paper. No one actually follows it. The experience of our constitution is different. Over the last half a century, several groups have questioned some provisions of the constitution. But no large social group or political party has ever questioned the legitimacy of the Constitution itself. This is an unusual achievement for any Constitution. The second reason for accepting the Constitution is that the Constituent Assembly represented the people of India. There was no universal franchise at that time, so the Constituent Assembly could not have been chosen directly by all the people of India. It was elected mainly by the members of the existing provincial legislatures that we mentioned above. This ensured a fair geographical share of members from all the regions of the country. The assembly was dominated by the Indian National Congress, the party that led India's freedom struggle, but the Congress itself included a variety of political groups and opinions. The assembly had many members who did not agree with the Congress. In social terms, too, the assembly represented members from different language groups, caste, classes, religions, and occupation. Even if the Constituent Assembly was elected by universal and franchise, its composition would not have been very different. Finally, the manner in which the Constituent Assembly worked gives the sanctity to the Constitution. The Constituent Assembly worked in a systematic, open, and consensual manner. First, some basic principles were decided and agreed upon. Then, a drafting committee chaired by Dr. B. R. Ambedkar prepared a draft constitution for discussion. Several rounds of thorough discussion took place on the draft constitution, clause by clause. More than 2,000 amendments were considered. The members deliberated for 114 days spread over 3 years. Every document presented and every word spoken in the Constituent Assembly has been recorded and preserved. These are called Constituent Assembly debates. When printed, these debates are 12 bulky volumes. These debates provide the rationale behind every provision of the Constitution. These are used to interpret the meaning of the Constitution. Guiding values of the Indian Constitution. In this book, we shall study the exact provisions of the Constitution on different subjects. At this stage, let us begin by understanding the overall philosophy of what our Constitution is all about. We can do this in two ways. We can understand it by reading the views of some of our major leaders on our Constitution, but it is equally important to read what the Constitution says about its own philosophy. This is what the preamble to the Constitution does. Let us turn to these one by one. The Dream and the Promise. Some of you may have noticed a name missing from the sketches of the makers of the Constitution. Mahatma Gandhi. He was not a member of the Constituent Assembly, yet there were many members who followed his vision. Years ago, writing in his magazine Young India in 1931, he had spelled out what he wanted the Constitution to do. I shall strive for a constitution which will release India from all thraldom and patronage. I shall work for an India in which the poorest shall feel that it is their country in whose making they have an effective voice, an India in which there shall be no high class and low class of people, an India in which all communities shall live in perfect harmony. There can be no room in such an India for the curse of untouchability or the curse of the intoxicating drinks and drugs. Women will enjoy the same rights as men. I shall be satisfied with nothing else. This dream of an India that has eliminated inequality was shared by Dr. Ambedkar, who played a key role in the making of the Constitution. But he had a different understanding of how inequalities could be removed. He often bitterly criticized Mahatma Gandhi and his vision. In his concluding speech to the Constituent Assembly, he stated his anxiety very clearly. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote on one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradiction? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. Finally, let us turn to Jawaharlal Nehru giving his famous speech to the Constituent Assembly at the stroke of midnight on 15 August 1947. Long years ago, we made a treaty with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our place, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the place of dedication to the service of India and her people and to still larger cause of humanity. Freedom and power bring responsibility. The responsibility rests upon this assembly, a sovereign body representing the sovereign people of India. Before the birth of freedom, we have endured all the pains of labor, and our hearts are heavy with the memory of this sorrow. Some of these pains continue even now. Nevertheless, the past is over, and it is the future that beckons to us now. That future is not one of ease or resting, but of incessant striving, so that we may fulfill the places we have so often taken and the one we shall take today. The service of India means the service of millions who suffer. It means the ending of poverty and ignorance and disease and inequality of opportunity. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but as long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. Philosophy of the Constitution. Values that inspired and guided the freedom struggle and were in turn nurtured by it form the foundation for India's democracy. These values are embedded in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. They guide all the articles of the Indian Constitution. The Constitution begins with a short statement of its basic values. This is called the preamble to the Constitution. Taking inspiration from American model, most countries in the contemporary world have chosen to begin their constitutions with a preamble. Let us read the preamble of our Constitution very carefully and understand the meaning of each of its keywords. The preamble of the Constitution reads like a poem on democracy. It contains the philosophy on which the entire Constitution has been built. It provides a standard to examine and evaluate any law and action of government to find out whether it is good or bad. It is the soul of the Indian Constitution. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. Note, the terms socialist and secular were added in preamble through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment in 1976. We, the people of India, the Constitution has been drawn upon and enacted by the people through their representatives and not handed down to them by a king or any outside powers. Sovereign people have supreme right to make decisions on internal as well as external matters. No external power can dictate the government of India. Socialist. Wealth is generated socially and should be shared equally by society. Government should regulate the ownership of land and industry to reduce socio-economic inequalities. Secular. Citizens have complete freedom to follow any religion, but there is no official religion. Government treats all religious beliefs and practices with equal respect. Democratic. a form of government where people enjoy equal political rights, elect their rulers, and hold them accountable. The government is run according to some basic rules. Republic. The head of the state is an elected person and not a hereditary position. Justice. Citizens cannot be discriminated on the grounds of caste, religion, and gender. Social inequalities have to be reduced. Government should work for the welfare of all, especially of the disadvantaged groups. Liberty. There are no unreasonable restrictions on the citizens in what they think, how they wish to express their thoughts, and the way they wish to follow up their thoughts in action. Equality. All are equal before the law. The traditional social inequalities have to be ended. The government should ensure equal opportunity for all. Fraternity. All of us should behave as if we are members of the same family. No one should treat a fellow citizen as inferior. Institutional design. A constitution is not merely a statement of values and philosophy. As we noted above, a constitution is mainly about embodying these values into institutional arrangements. Much of the document called Constitution of India is about this arrangement. It is a very long and detailed document. Therefore, it needs to be amended quite regularly to keep it updated. Those who crafted the Indian Constitution felt that it has to be in accordance with people's aspirations and changes in society. They did not see it as a sacred, static, and unalterable law, so they made provisions to incorporate changes from time to time. These changes are called constitutional amendments. The Constitution describes the institutional arrangement in a very legal language. If you read the Constitution for the first time, it can be quite difficult to understand. Yet, the basic institutional design is not very difficult to understand. Like any constitution, the Indian Constitution lays down a procedure for choosing persons to govern the country. It defines who will have how much power to take which decisions, and it puts limits to what the government can do by providing some rights to the citizen that cannot be violated. The remaining 3 chapters in this book are about these 3 aspects of the working of Indian Constitution. We shall look at some key constitutional provisions in each chapter and understand how they work in democratic politics. But this textbook will not cover all the salient features of the institutional design in the Indian Constitution. Some other aspects will be covered in your textbook next year. तो ये है इस चैप्टर का ग्लोसरी और ये है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइज। तो इसी के साथ हमारा आज का ये चैप्टर कंप्लीट हो गया है। तो अगर आप चैनल पर नए हैं तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर दीजिए और नोटिफिकेशन आइकन पर क्लिक कर दीजिए ताकि आपको सारे वीडियोस के अपडेट्स मिल सके। और अगर आपको वीडियो अच्छी लगी तो लाइक कर दीजिए, साथ ही अपने दोस्तों के साथ शेयर कीजिए ताकि उन्हें भी हेल्प हो सके। तो हमारा आज का ये सेशन यहीं तक था। थैंक यू, थैंक्स फॉर वॉचिंग।